Hello, my name is Phil. I'm the Rector of the Draycott and Len Valley Benefice. This is my Sunday sermon for the 5th of July 2026. Our reading today comes from Matthew chapter 11, and just to be completely upfront with you, this is one of the weeks where the lectionary misses out a chunk in the middle of the reading. I normally am quite contrary and insist on reading the bits that they've missed out. I'm not going to do that this time, so I think actually the start that's included and the end that's included tells a great message all put together. And I think that middle bit might open a few rabbit holes. So we're just doing the bit that's in the lectionary. But if you're reading through Matthew 11 on your own, do read the whole of it. Don't skip bits like the lectionary does and like I'm doing now. But let's read what the lectionary set for. To what shall I compare this generation? They are like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling out to others. We played the pipe for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, He is a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they said, He is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. It took me a few goes to pass my driving test, but I did eventually. And to be honest, I'm really glad that I don't have to take it again, because I'm not very good at performing on demand. Ultimately, when I passed my driving test, I was with my third driving instructor, and she was quite cynical. She taught me a few little tricks of the trade to get me through. The first suggestion was to take my test in my car rather than hers. And the reason for that was that my car didn't have the dual controls, so the examiner couldn't see when I was riding the clutch. She also taught me to set my rear view mirror slightly wrong. And because it was slightly off, I couldn't see everything just by moving my eyes. I had to turn my whole head just to check my mirror. That meant the examiner could see clearly that I was checking my mirrors. After I passed, she drove me home, and I always remember her saying as we pulled out of the test centre, Now you've passed your test, I'll show you how we really drive. Of course, there's a place for judgment in driving tests. As someone who failed twice, I'm quite glad, because actually putting me on the road unsupervised after those two attempts would not have been a good idea. And it's comforting to know those judgments happen every day to keep the roads safe. But when that kind of analytical judgment spills into other areas of our life, it can become incredibly toxic. Life would be intolerable if we spent it with someone sitting or standing next to us with a clipboard in the same way that they do for those 45 minutes of a driving test. Yet for the average person living in first century Judea, life felt a little bit like a permanent driving test. And to understand what's happening here in Matthew 11, we have to understand the religious climate of the day. You see, the Jewish people felt honour bound to follow the law that's set out by God in the Old Testament. But because it was set out by God, they were terrified of breaking the rules, even accidentally. So the religious leadership adopted lots of additional rules that were actually much stricter than the actual biblical rules. The idea was that if you obeyed the stricter set of rules, you would be protected forever breaking the less strict rules from God. This was known as building a fence around the Torah. If you obey the strict rules, you're safe from accidentally breaking the less strict rules. It began as an attempt to obey, but the problem was that these additional rules became oppressive. Not necessarily on purpose, but they shifted from being a way to help you keep the actual law into a mechanism for showing that you were following the rules. The religious leaders were meant to be guides to help people, but instead they became more like these kind of modern influencers that we see online, curating a performance standard of religiousness and righteousness that everybody else looks to and then feels guilty for not living up to. They were teaching a faith where, like in my driving test, you hid that you were riding the clutch, you hid what you were doing wrong, while you wildly exaggerated checking your mirrors to show that you were doing what was right. But this is an exhausting way to live. While today we may not worry about first century food laws, I think that we as a society have built a culture in which people are constantly judged and pushed into performance. The clipboard is still there. It's just judging us on slightly different things, pushing us into treading very tight lines, many of them where we're kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't. I think we do this to our young people when we tell them you can be anything you want to be, shoot for the stars, be ambitious. And then we make them compete for university places, jobs and promotions against hundreds of other people. I think we do it to parents when we bemoan the fact that children can't go out and play on the streets unsupervised like we used to. But if anything bad happens, we are the first to blame the parents. And we do it to older generations as well. We say, you're too old for work now, you've earned your rest and relaxation. But then, in the next breath, we expect them to step in and be the unpaid army that keeps society running. They have to become full-time babysitters, charity trustees, school governors, and volunteers. And I think we do it to ourselves as well. Do you ever feel bombarded by the pressure to be true to yourself? You be you. Don't be a sheep. Don't go along with the crowd. Don't worry about what other people think. But at the same time, we're terrified of offending anyone, living in a hypersensitive society where a single word wrong can face immediate judgment. In other words, we tell ourselves to passionately hold on to our individual views, but whatever we do, don't actually share them with anyone who might disagree with us. And I think this kind of mindset is what Jesus is talking into in verse 17 of our passage when he paints a picture of children singing a song. We played the pipe for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. Jesus' point is that John the Baptist came fasting, and they called him a demon. Jesus came eating and drinking, and they called him a glutton. You couldn't win with that lot. Jesus is speaking into a specific first century culture. But his words, I think, resonate deeply today, because whilst cultural pressures change, the root cause remains remarkably stable. Human-made religion always leads to performance and judgment, whether it's first century legalism or 21st century secularism. The clipboard always comes out. But what we see in our passage is that Jesus does something radically different. Jesus doesn't bring a heavier religion. He brings a relationship. When Jesus famously says at the end of the chapter, "Take my yoke upon you," he's using agricultural language to describe a completely different kind of faith. A yoke that is designed to bind two animals together so that their combined power can pull the weight. The performance that the religious leaders expected puts the worshipper on the stage to be watched, in the same way that we put ourselves on a stage to be watched, whether that's through posting up our Instagram aesthetic lives on social media, whether we're crafting the perfect CV for our next job interview, or if we're trying to assert our value and worthiness at the pub, in the coffee shop, or at the school gates. As Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, but as many have said since then, everyone's a critic. That's where Jesus' "take my yoke" is so countercultural. Because rather than putting us on a stage, he puts us in a field, and he comes alongside us, and together we pull the plough away from the gaze of the theatre or the cinema or the internet. Jesus flips the religious script. Rather than being there to judge us, he tells us that he is there to be in partnership with us. That doesn't mean there's no work to do. That doesn't mean it won't be hard at times. There is a plough to be pulled. But you don't have to impress Jesus as you pull. His instruction is to learn from me. He doesn't expect you to be the master who's got everything right, because that's him. He also tells us that he is gentle and humble in heart. He's not the audience at the theatre or the sports match waiting to be impressed and entertained. He is there alongside us. So in closing, as we go back out into the world this week, I want to challenge you to look for the times when you feel like you are right back in that driving test. Notice the moments when you feel like every eye is on you. Notice when you feel like you are riding the clutch, desperately hoping that nobody notices your flaws. When you feel the pressure to exaggerate your head movement so that everyone around you can see that you are doing the right thing, that you're okay and that you're hitting the mark. We're so used to living that way that maybe we don't often notice about this need to perform anymore. But look out for it this week. And wherever you catch yourself stepping onto that stage under the glare of the critics, make a conscious decision to step off. Walk away from the theatre, step back into the field, and slip your neck back into the yoke with Jesus. Because when you feel the pressure to be impressive and you choose not to be, that doesn't make you unimpressive. It makes you yoked to the God who carries what we cannot. And that's precisely why Jesus can invite the weary and the failing people to come back to him, because he himself has carried the greatest burden of all, the cross. And that means that we don't have to.